All right. Today we're going to start talking about learning, and we're going to talk about 3 or 4 major forms of learning. And one of the things you want to watch out for is how these different types of learning, how they differ from one another. So how is the Pavlovian conditioning different than operant conditioning? How are both of those different from latent learning? How are all those different from social learning? So let's start with just a few fundamentals. First, learning. What do we mean by learning? Well, learning, we are going to mean to be a relatively enduring change in behavior resulting from experience. Let me enlarge that just a little bit for you. Does that help any? So, a relatively enduring change in behavior resulting from experience. The general pattern, my drinking problem. Anybody know what movie that's from? Who said that? Thank you. It's tragic, the number of people who are uneducated about classic cinema. All right, so the general pattern that these are all going to follow is we have to have a stimulus. Something has to occur in the environment that we can respond to, learn from. The second big piece of the puzzle for us has to be attention at some level. We have to perceive the event and attend to it. Now, it might not always be that we're paying a lot of conscious attention to it, but we might nonetheless be processing information. And this will become important when we talk about latent learning. Now, at this point, the vast majority of the information we're processing is going to decay. It's just going to go away. It's not important. It's not worth further attending to. So we forget. And then the other route, the other piece of the puzzle that's going to be important to us is cognition. All the cognitive processes that go into things. So really working with material, thinking about it is going to be important. This procedure starts with the orienting response. So what we mean by that is the inborn tendency to notice and respond to novel or surprising stimuli. So there's quite a bit in that sentence. It's an inborn tendency. That means it's innate. It's not something you think about. It's not something you learn. It's hardwired. And that response is anytime that something around you changes, you notice it and you respond to it in some way. So if I had an air horn up here that you didn't know about, and I very well may, and I was to reach down and hit it, you would all notice that, wouldn't you? And you would respond to it. You might notice initially when the air conditioning kicks on and off, but after a little while you cease to do that. So that's the inborn tendency to notice and respond to novel or surprising stimuli. Another example that would be when I think I've told you the story when I was teaching in Oklahoma, just outside the Army base, where they used a lot of artillery. They had joint strike exercises. And for the first several months I was out there, I was startled quite often because they would do these exercises around the clock, and they'd be dropping bombs, shelling things, and 10 miles away, the ground would shake. I noticed that. I attended to that. I had no choice. It was an innate response. As time went on, however, every time the shelling started, every time the jets came screaming in right above where I was at, I paid less and less attention through the process called habituation. And habituation is another innate hardwired process in which exposure to repeated exposure to stimuli results in a decrease level of response. And the reason for this is you are learning as an organism that that stimuli is not signaling any environmental consequence. You're learning that in the case of the shelling, that you're not going to get hit. You're not going to get blown up. It's going to vibrate the building a little bit. That's about it. There's other examples that you might be familiar with. Every now and then, a police department will make a cutout of a police cruiser and put it alongside a road coming into town, and you see it, and what do initially? Yeah, you slow down. But even the dullest among us will eventually figure out that that cutout police car is not going to run us down. So eventually we stop attending to that signal. The flip side to habituation is sensitization, which is increase in sensitivity to responsiveness, to a repeated stimulus as a signal of environmental consequences. So what does that mean? Well, imagine our same police cruiser cutout, but we have a clever policeman who pulls his car up behind the cutout, and he's there with his radar gun. And as you come by, he clocks you going too fast, and you get a ticket. You have an environmental consequence. What happens the next time you see the cutout? Right. Very good. So you become more aware. And this is the sensitization, this hyper-responsiveness, this over-responsiveness, is going to be important to things, the development of things like phobias, overreactions to things that may or may not actually represent threats. So that's some terms you need to be comfortable with as we go forward. By the way, I should tell you that this is a chapter where a lot of people get into trouble. And it's not because the material is necessarily so difficult, but this is a chapter that you cannot cram for successfully, because you have to understand how the parts fit together, and a lot of the language is counterintuitive. So it's real important that you do your flashcards. It's real important that you study diligently and over time so that you're prepared, because you have to be able to apply all this information. All right.